How are Halo's guns so perfectly balanced, except the pistol? In 1999, Jason Jones, the co-founder of Bungie, took the stage with Apple's Steve Jobs. But there was a third party on stage as well, a little game called Halo.
Halo's still a work in progress, and when it comes out first half of next year, it's going to be even better.
No one knew that a cybernetic soldier named Master Chief was on the verge of a huge breakthrough, but Microsoft ultimately saw potential.
Master Chief is a big star now!
To launch their new Xbox, Microsoft acquired Bungie, and 2 years later, Halo Combat Evolved was their fledgling console's killer app. You pretty much know the rest.
Ain't no way that you could beat me. Even my initials spell it C.
The franchise has sold 60 million copies, landed 4 novels of questionable quality on the New York Times bestseller list, and has its own forthcoming television series produced by Steven Spielberg. It's also been played in every college dorm room around the world. Probably. People love Halo. The human race has logged over 6 billion hours playing it online, and that's not counting the original because it lacked an online mode, which is outrageous. And in the Halo 5 beta, there have already been 20 million matches played and 181 million deaths recorded. And that game isn't even coming out until the fall. So what got Halo to the top of the notoriously crowded shooter genre? Guns. Perfectly balanced guns. Now look, there are many things that made Halo great. It had a fully realized world, beautiful utopian architecture, and a plethora of multiplayer modes. Not to mention that the Warthog was a blast to drive around with your buddy hanging out the back. All of those things are great, but for my money, the real reason was the guns. True, every shooter has guns, obviously, but Halos were a cut above the rest, so what made them so special? One word. Balance. Halo's balance was and is pitch perfect. Like fine winemakers who balance various levels of fruit, tannins, and acidity, Halo's game designers took great care to balance the various types of guns. Hardy LaBelle, Halo's multiplayer designer, worked from the idea that balance is not making one weapon a crappier version of another, but of giving each weapon a unique role. And believe it or not, Halo's gun balance is based on the game of rock, paper, scissors that you've absolutely played. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot! Originally called shushuling, rock, paper, scissors began in China during the Han Dynasty and represents reasoning at its most basic. You know how this works. Rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, and paper beats rock for some weird reason. You see this principle all the time in games, like how the original Pokemon comes in fire, water, and grass types. And in Halo, it goes shotgun, pistol, sniper rifle. LaBelle called this a matrix.
Morpheus, the line was traced, I don't know how.
I know, they cut the hard line.
Halo is a shooter, obviously, and there's a lot of skill involved, but on an even playing field dictated by the law of averages, each gun wins against one gun, loses to the other gun, and could go either way in a draw against itself. The shotgun beats the pistol because of its close range power. You have a good chance of firing off a few point-blank shotgun rounds before the mid-range pistol kills you because the pistol is weaker and harder to control. The pistol beats the sniper rifle because it shoots pretty far and it's much easier to land your shot while the other player is fumbling around with a scope. And the sniper rifle beats the shotgun. Although you're a sitting duck while aiming, you can see the guy with a shotgun coming from a mile away and the shotgun is totally useless at long range. But is that really so unique? Of course not. Every first-person shooter has that kind of design. However, when LaBelle designed another matrix for those weird Covenant guns, that's when Halo's design strategy became complex and nuanced and beloved, whether players realized it or not. Now, Covenant guns are weaker than the holy triad of shotgun, pistol, and sniper rifle, and they don't follow the traditional rock, paper, scissors strategy, but they make up for it with special abilities. Their bullets had special armor-busting capabilities that played havoc on your defenses. The plasma rifle actually stuns enemies so that they can't shoot back, which is incredibly satisfying. What about the Needler? Oh, the Needler. Well, it's the outlier. It's kind of the Clyde of the Halo franchise. LaBelle told us that the Needler was based on a cool piece of promo art and never really fit well into the Matrix. But to be fair, it's pretty good at flushing out opponents from active camouflage because it's heat-seeking. With the introduction of the plasma weapon, suddenly you weren't just thinking about the rock, paper, scissors design of the military guns, but also this second system of the alien guns that involves armor piercing and stuns. Let's say that you have the shotgun. You now have some options. Do you grab the sniper rifle and beat someone at rock, paper, scissors, or do you go for the plasma rifle and try to stun them into submission? This is what the game theorist Jesper Juhl calls variable and quantifiable outcome. A game like rock, paper, scissors has low variable outcomes because you basically win the same way every single time if you know the basic rules. But a complex game like chess has millions of variable outcomes that are different every time you win. And while Halo is strategically simpler than chess, you are still trying to outthink your opponent instead of just automatically reacting. The complexity of the gun's balance gave the game enough layers of decision making that players had to develop deep skill and strategy, which is why we still love playing it today. Naturally, the balance of Halo has changed over the last 14 years. Many thought that the pistol in the original Halo was overpowered, for instance. There's even a bit of apocrypha about Jason Jones sneaking to change the code of the pistol at the last minute to beef it up because it was his favorite weapon. So in Halo 2, the pistol was toned way down, and in Halo 3, it changed from a weaker, fast-firing gun to a slower, powerful utensil. And for Halo 5, Chris King, the lead sandbox designer, told us that the pistol will return to its former glory. And now Halo has even more guns that are dual wielding, and a new aiming system, all of which have to be balanced even more delicately. But King says they still rely on Halo's original design matrix, where each gun has a specific role that will predict whether a weapon will win or will lose. This is because good balance elevates good games to greatness. A well-balanced game becomes more than a pure contest of skill where the player with the best aim wins.
What the? Where?
It becomes a clash of great minds as well as great skill. Or you could just be the guy who camps out with the energy sword. So what do you think? Are the guns the secret to Halo's long-running success? And remember, I'm just telling you what the original design intention of Halo was. We spoke to some of the creators, so please don't yell at me if it doesn't work out for you in practice. Regardless, hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Today's comments are brought to you by Squarespace. Last week we talked about racism and NPCs, and you all had a lot to say. Let's take a look. So before we get started, real quick, I wanted to just do a high level kind of overview of what I saw in the comments. A couple of things that we should probably engage with before we get started. Do a little exercise for me. Pretend when you wake up in the mirror, the person that you see is not the person that you normally see. It's some other person. It could be a different race or nationality. It could be a different gender. And you all should be used to this, right? Because we play video games and we're used to inhabiting other characters. So if you're pretending to be this other person in the real world, how might that affect the way that you see things in your day-to-day existence, your walk to work or your walk to school or your interactions with everyday people? Because that's what happens when I play video games. I don't see a lot of characters that are reflective of who I am, of my specific racial makeup or where I'm from necessarily, and that does affect the way that I think about games. But my desire to want to talk about race and gender and some of these other things is not because I'm trying to drive the point home or trying to sort of identify racism or sexism or whatever in everyday things. I'm only trying to talk about games in their totality. That means running the spectrum, the entire spectrum, looking at how Pac-Man ghosts work and how Mario's jump functions on one end of the spectrum and race and gender issues on the other. So if we're really going to talk about games, we have to talk about all of these different aspects of games. Regardless, I did have to remove a lot of racist and violent comments, which only demonstrate the need to talk about race, because if people are getting so upset just with the idea of talking about something, that means we probably do need to be talking about it. One last thing about the term racism. A lot of you I think were uncomfortable with the idea that something could be racist, regardless of whether or not the creators intended that to be so. You need to understand that racism is a system. It's something that it covers all of our everyday interactions. It's a system, right? So you can do something or make something that the intention wasn't racist, but the context in which it exists does make it racist. And that includes people who are of color. Black people can be racist as well. So, I think we do need to understand that when I talk about racism, I'm not trying to make specific accusations and saying, oh, that person's a racist and put them down. I'm trying to look at this thing in the larger picture. So anyway, let's get into it. All right, Resident Evil 5. A lot of you took issue with me talking about Resident Evil 5 in the context of racist NPCs, which for me is pretty good because it means that you agreed with the vast majority of the rest of the episode. So that's awesome. But I'm gonna spend a little bit more time talking specifically about Resident Evil 5 and why I thought it was racist and problematic. All right, so let me get into it. So first and foremost, Africa, right? So Resident Evil 5 sort of treats Africa, even in its fictional state, as this single place, right? So there's all these sort of like African stereotypes, people throwing spears, African pickup trucks, sort of vaguely African religions and languages, right? That's really problematic because Africa is a huge place with hundreds of millions of people. North Africans are totally different from Central Africans, who are different from West Africans, who are different from South Africans. That's not even including Madagascar and Cape Verde. So when we talk about Africa as this place, to reduce it into this like sort of single expression is really offensive to the hundreds of millions of people who are all totally different that live there. That's my biggest, by far, my biggest problem with Resident Evil 5. I'm not saying you can't do a game in Africa. I'm saying if you do, because video game makers spend so much time and effort getting every little detail right, I'm saying if you do one, pick a specific place. They could have picked a place like Kenya and really dove in and tried to capture the people there, but they didn't. And that's my biggest problem so far. The next thing we should understand is that Resident Evil 5 exists in a historical context that needs to be reckoned with. Specifically, I'm not saying that you can't have a game in which you shoot black people, whether they're zombies or not. What I am saying is that you have to deal with the history of the imagery of white people with guns shooting black people. Here in the United States, there's been a rash of white cops shooting black people. That's a very, very real thing. Africa, as a continent, has been divided up by white people with guns who came in and used violence to separate different tribes, to sort of make Africa into what it is right now. These are all real things that happen. So when I look at a game like Resident Evil 5, not engaging with that reality is very, very difficult. I can't not talk about it. So that's why it's incredibly important, and that's why I think that Resident Evil 5 has some really, really big problems. Jonathan Blow, the maker of Braid and The Witness, also took issue with my episode, but not for the reasons that a lot of you in the comments did. Jonathan had a very specific point of view, specifically that if you remove the violent and power fantasy dynamics in a lot of games, then the problems I identified, like shooting black people in Resident Evil 5, those essentially disappear. And that's sort of true, but that would suggest somehow that if we remove all violence from the world of games, that even though there's racism outside of the world of games, that somehow wouldn't find its way in, and we shouldn't say something about it if it does. So I don't know, I feel like that's a bit of wishful thinking on your part. I would love that to be the case. I don't think it's just as simple as changing the mechanics of what the player is. I mean, one big thing is obviously having people of color being the main characters. So anyway, but I thank you for the thought. I appreciate it, and I get what you're saying. Squarespace is an easy way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/gameshow for a special offer. Squarespace, build it beautiful.